Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tainu te waka tararua te maunga o taki te awa Ngāti Raukawa te iwi. Nai te horu rawa ko Ngāti Koraki ngā hapu, ko Raukawa te marae, ko Joy Te Wiata tuku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I think the best place to start with that is to think about colonisation. Because any kind of violence in terms of Maori thinking comes from the erosion of our own values and our own worldview. And that's happened over, we know that's happened over lots of generations now. And so when we talk about sexual violence and sexual assault, I think we're needing to look at how did we live originally compared to what's happening now. And so if we're talking about colonisation, and we also need to have a conversation about violation and what is it a violation of. And for Māori, sexual violence and sexual assault is about a violation of mana and tapu, and a violation of whare tangata and of whakapapa. So there's a lot of values and understandings that go within those concepts. In terms of the violation of mana and tapu, I also mentioned the whare tangata. So we're talking about a sacred area here for Māori. So we're not just talking about the physical, although that's critically important, and the psychological, which is critically important. But there's an area of spirituality that is critical for the well-being of Māori, and it may be for other cultures as well, but for my own people and the feedback that I've had from other people talking about this topic, it's critically important for well-being. So when sexual violence occurs and there's been a breach of mana and tapu, what that starts to create for the people who have been harmed and for the people who have been doing the harming. Now, I think that's a really important point for us to be making, that not only does it harm and violate and diminish the mana and the tapu of the person who has been assaulted, but the person who's doing the harming, the same thing is happening to their mana and their tapu. So And when you have that violence happening within a whānau context, you've then got all of this sense of well-being has been eroded away because there's this conflict in the middle of it. And in order to bring back some sort of restoration, if you like, you need to have those understandings, because restoring the whānau again is going to be critical to the well-being, both of the person who's being harmed and of the person who's done that harming. When we talk about the whare tangata, and for some people may not understand necessarily what that is, and it's translated in English as the womb, but for Maori we're talking about the houses of humanity. So it then becomes huge because it's the whare tangata where it's the place where the tupuna have come from, it's the place where our future comes from, it's the place where our knowledge is nurtured. So when there's been a violation of that, you get there's no wonder that we end up with this disconnection, this erosion from our values. So I don't know if that's in depth, but it's certainly just scratching the surface, I think, of some of the impacts for Māori. There are a few stories that I've heard of where sexual violence has been dealt with, and I haven't heard of a lot of stories because my understanding is that it didn't occur a great deal because of the huge response to it, if you like. So sexual violence wasn't tolerated. One of the things that are important, I think, pre-colonisation was the understanding of who a wahine in particular was, and the valuing of them in terms of their whare tangata that I've spoken about. And so looking after women or wahine was really important. and the value of children. You know, when colonisation occurred, we lost our language. That was one of the huge impacts of colonisation. And we're slowly getting our language back. I know my own iwi started, you know, its own project in 1975 to bring back te reo, because we had almost lost it amongst our own people. But in the translation, we end up with some sort of approximation that loses the fullness of what our reo really means. And so in the context of valuing, I think about the word of tamariki, for example. You know, we just say, well, that means children, we've got to look after our children. Well, actually, tama ariki, you know, we're talking about the children or the sons of the ariki, you know, our guardians, our keepers, our spiritual guardians. So that was the value that was put on the lives of children. So to sexually abuse them there was no question that it was a huge violation, and it wasn't tolerated. So I think that's what we need to do, is compare back to what was before, and our kaumātua all have bits of that knowledge that they can offer us. But so often sexual abuse, and particularly for Māori, is compared to what's happening with other groups of people, you know. And I know we do that ourselves, because the rates have been quite high amongst Māori as victims, survivors. But I think it's more useful in terms of finding a way forward to see what existed before and what is possible going forward. One of the things that has become apparent through the work that I've had privy to is that with the erosion of values, for example, comes an erosion of identity. And there was an example that I was aware of a few years ago, and these sort of examples are still prevalent. There's things about our culture are often questioned, and one of these examples was where sleeping on a marae was being framed up as being making Māori vulnerable to sexual abuse because of a communal living. Now, and that was splashed across the newspapers. Now, that kind of discussion really creates a sense for some Māori that our practices aren't as good as or as safe as practices that come from a different worldview, which is usually a Western worldview. And so those sort of dominant discourses, if you like, or ideas become prevalent, and some of our people have internalised those ideas and have believed them intrinsically about who they are. As Māori, that isn't okay, that isn't good enough, and to be safer and to be better, they need to be something else. So I think that's got a direct connection too when it comes to sexual violence. So sometimes looking for help, intellectual ideas are framed up. If they're intellectual from a Western worldview, then they're likely to be more effective. So those are some of the things that for Māori, when they're seeking help, are contending with. When people have spoken out about their sexual abuse, it's been devastating for whānau, because in many ways what it has tended to do is the whole of the whānau has been judged because the abuse has occurred. And I've done quite a lot of work with people who have created harm, and the whānau are seen as being complicit in the harm occurring. And so if there is a victim within the whānau, it can be very hard for them to speak out. One, because of bringing some of that around their whānau, that sense of shame around their whānau, and that sense of judgment. So that can be really difficult for them to do that. And then sometimes the whānau so working so hard to maintain a sense of pride for the whānau that they have at times encouraged the victim not to do anything about getting help. And Yeah, so I think it kind of cuts both ways, really. I think, firstly, to have some real awareness of the cultural differences, and one of the things I think has come through that's been really important is that whether or not a Māori person is asking for any particular Māori help, if you like, it's not really relevant to the process, but what's more relevant is that people are made available who understand things Māori, so that they can actually work with them to start from the first moment they speak out, start working on the ideas of reconnection to who they are. You know, we hear reports back of where people are kept separate from their whānau, they don't know who to speak to, they're offered generic services that might be available right at the time of the interview, but they feel quite bewildered, and very often what they're needing is someone who understands what it is to awhi them, to do a karakia with them. And they might say to you, oh, I don't do karakia very often, and if you say to them, well, do you mind if I do a karakia, you know, and being in those situations myself, every time I've done that, Māori people have responded to that and have said afterwards how much they've appreciated that. And also in those beginning times where they're being asked to explain everything that highly intimate that's occurred to them. So the very basics of whakawhanaungatanga are really important, where you can connect together on the basis of where you come from and who stands with you. And you know, when I was talking about whakapapa in the beginning, those are some of the critical ideas. For Māori, we're not standing there alone, and to be able to talk to people and say, look, you know, this person is with you, and this nanny is standing alongside you, you know, so that you're creating a sense of safety about them, and bringing their words into the room, you know. So what would nanny have done? And you know, it's like, and often it's just nanny might have just held me and had a big tangi, you know. So it's like stepping outside of what the normal kind of interview processes would be, and I was going to say and be a bit more human, but it's that you know, I was going to say it's that Māori touch, you know, just being there for the other person, and yeah, and letting them be spiritual if they want to be. If they want to talk about what they're, you know, when it was happening, they heard their nanny say this to them, you know, that's not going to be framed up as though there's something that they've done, you know, that's mentally wrong with them, but that they're tapping into another side of themselves that helps them to, you know, remain stronger in their core. If we accept that abuse is the violation of mana and tapu, we are talking about something that's spiritual. Now, if we're working with something spiritual, then we need a spiritual response to that. And so that takes us then to places of karakia and waiata, you know, like these, they're our cultural practices, but really they're our healing tools as well. I was talking to a kaumātua, and he said, you know, when people have been harmed in this way, from the very beginning, kaumātua need to be called in. So, and we're talking kaumātua or which is karaua or kuia. So when I say kaumātua, we're talking about male and female here. And he said, so it's not a question of whether they should be called in or not, but it's a question of who is this person in front of you, what is their understanding of spirituality, is it, and he called it religious in terms of the Christian ideas of spirituality. So is it religious or is it from the Maori world? And once you know that, then you bring the right people in to be able to be alongside the person that's been harmed. But it's not a question of whether or not you work with the dimensions of spirituality. That's a given. It's just how do you do that? Our view around responses for Māori is that as soon as possible, the very early responses should be coming from a Māori person. For a person who's been a Maori person that's been harmed. So if someone calls in a crisis line, for example, firstly our view is that ideally there would be Māori on those crisis lines as well as non-Māori. So that at the very first point of contact there's someone Māori that can respond. And in the event of there being no Māori to respond, at that point, that at the earliest point after that, a referral and support for a referral and encouragement for a referral to a Māori service is made. So there are, and we're aware there are only a few kaupapa Māori services right across the motu at this time, but our hope is that there will be support for more services, kaupapa Māori services, to be developed, because it's really critical when we think about the number of people, Māori people, that are being sexually harmed. The lack of services is scary is the word that comes to me, because I just think there are so many Māori people that need specific help. And so frontline services, first response, do what you can to contain it, to hold the person in the moment, do everything that you know to do well, and do it well, being mindful that you're working with someone of another culture here, and then at the first opportunity, support them to be in contact with kaupapa Māori services who can take it from there. We understand that when sexual abuse occurs, and if it's within a whānau setting, then there may be a period of time where there are members of the whānau that the survivor doesn't want to spend some time with, and it wouldn't necessarily be safe for them to spend some time with. But ultimately, what we would be saying to non-Māori who are working with Māori is that the intention needs to always be there. The notion of reconnection with whānau needs to always be there, because if we're talking about healing for Māori, healing involves reconnection with the whānau and with the hapu. Now, which might be different to wellness or healing for non-Māori, but so it's really important that if there is a need to work with them in isolation from some members of their whānau, what I want to say here is it might be from their particular whānau. You've got to remember there's hapu. This is why it's just so critical to work with Māori, because Māori understand and have a good idea of who the people are that surround an individual. For example, if harm had occurred to me and I could talk to any one of my Māori colleagues who would immediately know where I sit just through hearing my pepeha and my hapu, and be able to support me to connect with them. So even if it wasn't my whānau that I could spend time with immediately, I would be wrapped and round and held by my hapu. And that's critical. Isolation for Māori is soul destroying, can lead to a whole lot of, can lead to things like depression and suicide, and so it's really critical that the intention is held, that's always remembered. And I think that's one of the huge differences. We talk about the individual so much in Western society, but within Māori society, the individual exists because of the whānau and the hapu. and so healing must involve whānau and hapu as soon as possible.